Hey, we're back in what I call my studio that looks more like a construction zone with Wes Phillips, a poet, and he's going to read a poem about personification of a fence post.
The poem is literally called I Am a Fence Post. It's also the first line in the poem. That's a stylistic flourish that I picked up in school that I really like. It encourages the reading of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I am a fence post, a memory totem bound with iron thorns, perpetually tortured by ancient wooden whispers embedded in the splinters of my jungled bones. I could tell you tales of lumberjacks who butchered millions of my kin, of spider songs entwined in the boughs of my mother's silken hair, of rumors down the road, your neighbor's planned sacrifice to some unknown god, animals burning on iron racks, their ancient hymns sung round fires to my fellow members' screaming tune, of vows broken over me, a 15-year-old girl who scourged her love-carved heart on my trunk, her tears imbued with binding spells of warlocks spitting on ground outside your house, thus your garden never grows. Oh, if only you could read my wood rings, unbind me from this life in line, or reassign my roots, I could tell a tale or two.
Now, Wes, there's this idea in Western culture about if only the walls could talk.
Oh.
And you're giving the fence post a voice. And the fence post seems to be, how shall I say, concerned about ecology.
Quite.
Why is that?
Well, because I'm concerned about ecology.
Why?
I hate the idea that... Really, I hate the idea that the Earth is fallible. I realize it's true. I can't fix that. But I hate the idea that people know it and don't care. And that they want to destroy it. Well, that they want to use it. And then in doing so, they could destroy it. I hate that people aren't careful.
So tell me, if you had a magic wand... And I know that goes outside of your background, right? But let's just say you had a magic wand. What would you do about the ecology today?
What would I do? I'd obliterate, in a green way, all of the nuclear power plants. I would excise them from existence. And then I would also replace every fossil fuel with renewable energies across the board. Wind, solar, geothermal. And I would just replace them on the spot, if I could.
But why? Because the world's coming to an end, right? According to the theology you were raised in. So why bother? If the world's going to end, then why not just take advantage of it?
That's the issue with that thinking. And with the book that you're referring to, Revelation, the End of the World, the Apocalypse, it's, as we often say, heavily subject to interpretation. A new interpretation that I particularly like, because this puts the responsibility back on mankind to take care of the earth, is that Revelation is in fact talking about the future destruction of the temple of the Jews in Roman history, and not about the end of the world, because for the Jews that was the end of their world.
Yes.
The world where the Jewish religion is organized and present in physical form. Which means that Revelation is really just about that prediction. It's gone. That means that what we have now is what we have, and we need to take care of it.
So, do you really think we could build a better planet?
Absolutely.
Why?
And to quote another biblical allusion, it goes back to the heart of the Genesis myth, which is man as caretaker of the earth. That's our job. That oddly enough, is never repealed. People like to use the term dominion when God says you have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every other creeping thing. It's not domination, even though it shares similar roots. It's about stewardship and responsibility to care for these things.
Yes, because if I recall correctly from the Genesis myth, it says that God created everything, but he didn't have anybody to take care of it.
Yeah.
And so that's why he created Adam.
Somebody to continue the processes, yeah.
And do you view that as humans responsibility to take care of our planet?
Absolutely. Actually, to go further along in the myth, I think that the great sin, the failing, the missing of the mark, is that the royal we, Adam, overdrew from nature's resources. You have all of this renewable resource. I have one tree, you cannot touch it. And he goes and takes it and imbalances the entirety of the world because he took more than was due him. That's my ecological understanding of the myth. And I think that's one of the main reasons. He says, curses the ground for your sake. You know, the earth is messed up because you did this. It's like you took more than you needed.
You'll have to live off the sweat of your brow.
Yep.
And I will give you weeds and spurs and...
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell me, why would you write a poem about a fence post, for God's sake? What inspired that?
So, this is during the same poetry workshop with Judith Roney that I was working on. No, I'm sorry, I lied to you. This is the second poetry workshop. Throughout that whole season, I believe it was the spring, and here in Florida, our spring is mostly like the edges of winter. So I would go out and sit at the edge of my property in the far right corner from my house, and I sat next to the fence line, because it's all cleared out and nice, but there's like trees there, and I just like to sit there, and that's where all these poems from that semester, I wrote them all there. They all began just observing, listening, and feeling the environment around me. And right next to my spot, there's actually a big, one of those like large fence posts, a big thick one that's really old, and it's covered in patina, and like it's like a barbed wire wrapped around it and old nails hammered into it. It's very old and rugged looking. I took a picture of it. I don't know if I still have it on my phone, but it stands ajar from the fence line. It's not attached anymore, but it's part of where the old fence line was, and so that's where I'd go and sit. It's like my little totem, and that's when I was given the prompt to write, you know, from the point of view of something other than yourself, you know, an object or an animal or something, and that's what I saw whenever I started to write it. So this fence post that stood outside of the line, like where was it? Where, like, I started thinking about where it comes from, because you know, when you see a fence post, you usually think in functional terms. That's a fence post. And whenever I looked at it, I was like, oh my god, that used to be a tree. I wonder where it was. I wonder where it's from. You know what I mean? You know, I wonder why it's no longer part of the fence, and all that kind of swirled around and amalgamated here.
So when you talk in that poem about barbecues,
Yeah.
could you please read those lines again?
Let's see. Of rumors down the road, your neighbors plan sacrifice to some unknown god, burning animals on iron racks, their ancient hymns sung around the fires to my fellow members' screaming tune.
What does that mean?
So, barbecues, but the equation of it to like an animal sacrifice, or maybe a pagan practice of some kind. Also the very act of, like, if you're a fence post and you saw, if you're a fence post formerly a tree, and you saw trees being cut down and used to burn, take part in a sacrifice, that's kind of like if it was a human being, it'd be a human sacrifice, but for a fence post or a tree, it's a tree sacrifice. You know, the same kind of, what a perversion of my kind is. That's that kind of thought that I was trying to see.
Okay, so tell me, are you are you optimistic about what we can do with our planet, or are you pessimistic?
I'm optimistic because I think it's our function and our job to promote its health, to care for it, and I think that awareness of that has grown considerably, and I think that it's growing. The more people talk, me and my wife actually are starting to do more green stuff, you know, trying to work on our recycling methods and stuff. We're starting to institute that in our own house. But like just with the whole election going on and researching the Green New Deal and the Green Party and learning about their ideas and stuff, and even though it's not in the popular spectrum of, you know, the Democrat versus the Republican, I think that just putting it out there is helping.
So tell me, do you think that helping our Earth is bigger than parties?
Absolutely. Yes, we should, you know, they don't want to worry about who's going to be king next and what their economic policy is going to be and their foreign policy, and I'm like, The earth is dying. It's literally dying because of our mismanagement, and we're not like they still want to worry about the political scheme and who's got the money and all that stuff. And I think it's just not even as important.
All right, so this is going to come off the wall, but you've told me you've been reading the prophets lately.
Yes, from the Bible.
And when you say the earth is dying, do you feel like a poet can be a prophet?
As a matter of fact, I've given this a great deal of thought, and I actually think that they're synonymous. I don't think there's a difference. Because if you read the old poets, you see it's a call and response poem between God and the messenger. And the messenger brings the message of God to the people and then writes a response. Often God's is one of hope, oddly enough, one of hope and, hey, just come back, we can work together to make things better. And then the poet turns to the people and says, you are all horrible. And he socially commentates on their behavior. God goes through phases in the stories of like, I'm going to destroy you if you don't come back. And the poet's like, please don't destroy them. And then turns around and is like, you're gonna get it, because you're horrible. You know, he's just like, they turn around and they start commentating. And I think that's important. And I think that goes in line with the romantic concept that Percy Shelley said that poets are the unspoken legislators of the world, or they're about the lawmakers. They're never recognized, but, you know, culture shifts because of poets speaking out. And I think that is synonymous with prophets, the whole function, bringing the word. And poetry is the word in pure form for me. Whether from God or not, it's, you know, bring the word and try to make a change. So, poet, prophet, same thing. I'd identify as a prophet in my own culture, except that I figured I might be ran out of town because there's a difference for them, and I don't see a difference. If you have a message, bring it.
So, if you have the message, bring it. Will you bring another poem to us?
Sure.
That's so articulate.
Okay. Alright, I'm going to bring it to the subject of love now.
What is it called?
This is called The Woman I Know.
Okay.
It's a poem I sent you a few months back during the beginning of the year.
And it's the subject of love.
Yeah. Love is the impetus. It's more about the blues. Or sadness, but within that context of love. Overarching.
Bring it on.
Alright. I also wrote this on a rainy day, actually. So, the woman I know is not here today. It is Monday. Crows litter my yard like empty bottles. I have seen 1,000 crows. The streets are littered with empty bottles and women. I have seen 1,000 women. The crows flash away, flapping like eyelashes of the woman I know. I have seen 1,000 Mondays. I have seen 1,000 empty bottles.
Tell me, in this poem, you're not mad at crows or at women.
No.
And yet, you reference them.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, just in the context of them being there. It goes back to a concept that I think we discussed earlier, being lonely in a crowd. You can be surrounded by beauty, beautiful people, beautiful women, beautiful nature, beautiful things, but if you are without the one person or thing that makes you, you're alone. That's what I was feeling that day. And actually, I wasn't really... I used the imagery of women on the street, many women, or many crows in the yard, because crows in the yard was what I was seeing. I was at my house, and I was technically alone, but I was seeing that, and then I started making an equation. I was like, well, I'm missing the woman I know, the one that I can talk to, the one I care about, the one I love. I could go out in the street and find any woman to talk to love, to care about, to do that. But they're not somebody I know. It won't be as deep because it'll be too superficial at that point, when I was really just missing the person that I can talk to, without being judged or anything,
Nice. Nice. So you're not equating women with crows.
No.
What you're doing is using that as a metaphor to talk about loneliness
Yeah.
and fidelity.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
Awesome. What do you have next for us?
I have one more love poem. Or really a blues poem in the context of love again. This one's a little bit more cynical, I guess.
And tell me, you are married, right?
Yes.
And you do love your wife.
Absolutely.
So these are not poems that condemn your wife.
No, indeed. They're not. Some of them, well, they're not necessarily even like. The thing about a love poem is it doesn't have to be in the context of like a marriage or anything, because like with a love song or pop song, it can apply to so many people, so many different things. So I would never consider these like directed against my wife, really. You know what I mean? Like in the sense because they're more cynical, a little more blues, like depressed versions. I think about our love, it goes into it, you know, in that context, but sometimes I like to step out, what about without this context? You know what I mean? Without the fidelity. That's what this poem's actually about. What about outside of the fidelity of a love relationship?
Okay.
This one's called Unholy Ground. I wrote it recently and I sent it to you. So it starts, I lay my lantern under a bushel, missionary position, while you turn your eyes like hungry mouths on whoever loves you less, with affection, overkill. The lantern sparks a burning bush, and I devour my shoes on unholy ground.
What the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, it's kind of...
You have all sorts of biblical references.
I love the allusions, yes.
And how can that not be a poem that's scorning your wife?
Well, if you take it as an author writing outside of his... What do we call that whenever an author writes with a different voice? I can't remember the literary term. It's like writing a character's point of view.
Yeah.
Kind of like the same way you do with the fence post, writing from a different point of view. Because my perspective really isn't this. Maybe at one point when I was more cynical about our relationship, maybe before we were married, you know, the idea that you might be unfaithful, or she might be unfaithful to somebody, you know. Not really now, honestly. It's not really how I feel, but I think it's a good poem.
So you're saying that you're different than the speaker in that poem?
Yes.
It's two different things.
Yeah.
How so?
I mean, the idea that my wife would be unfaithful, I just don't believe that about her, you know. I trust her. We're faithful to each other, you know. So, this is not a how dare you kind of poem. It's like, or how could you? It's because it's not true in my life, you know. But the ideas from like early relationship status, the cynicism is there, you know. At one point in my life I certainly thought this. Like, what if? The big what ifs.
Right.
All that fear and the risk of starting something with someone who could potentially be unfaithful to you. But you know, for some people it's real.
It's real all the time.
Yeah.
But for your life experience, that's not real. That was just a worry.
Yeah. It's just taking the worry and trying to ground it in some images.
Awesome.
That's that one.
Do you have one more poem or no?
Not in the list.
No.
Oh wait, no. Yeah, it's right. I do have one. So I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's on my
the
phone. Thank you. Yeah. I was like, not in the list. It's right here. And this one is mostly an exercise, and this one's love related as well. An exercise in repetition and structure. Something I usually don't deal with. This is one that I particularly set out to try to make sure the structure remained the same. We'll see how effective it is. It's also titled after its first line, She Loved Me Like a Rocking Horse. So it says, she loved me like a rocking horse, back and forth until I changed positions, back and forth and back and forth. Argument, no discourse, back and forth, never changed positions, back and forth and back and forth. Telephone tag, 2 lawyers later, back and forth and back and forth. Skip down soon, love you too, back and forth and back and forth. Wick whittled down to burning intention, back and forth and back and forth. Found a brand new situation, back and forth and back and forth. Back and forth and back and forth. Wick whittling down, back and forth.
So tell me, that poem to me sounds like divorce.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the concept I was playing with there. Because the idea started from the concept, like, she loved me like a rocking horse. I thought that was really pretty, really beautiful. It's kind of innocent, childish, and also a reference to sexual positions. It's, it's very in your face. And so I started thinking about just like lovers being in love and trying new positions and trying new things, and then how it might turn into, how the idea of being back and forth, giving back and forth, can turn into throwing back and forth or yelling back and forth, parental discussions, arguments, and then how that devolves in, but the back and forth is still there, it's just, it gets perverted over time.
So you're saying that the conflict is actually a mockery of the love initially.
Yeah. Because that back and forth never ends, even with a divorced couple, especially when you have kids. Back and forth, back and forth. That'd probably be another line I could include. But yeah, the brand new situation at the end is supposed to intimate that, like, yeah, I've got a new place, got a new girl.
Got a new situation.
Trying all new things. New situation, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I guess, I didn't realize this until now, but like the end is like a little chorus, and I was thinking about putting that in a few others, like repeating the last line with the tag back and forth, it says wick whittling down, back and forth. The idea there, I like the idea of the candle being like a symbol of passion, especially like it has an obvious sexual reference for genitalia, but like the idea that it slowly burns out, and in sexual terms, yes, you run out of semen or love or whatever, but in passion, like as it whittles down. And I realized just now, like whenever I included in the last line, found a brand new situation, wick whittling down, here we go again. It's a cycle back and forth.
So tell me, you don't seem ashamed to write about sexuality.
I try not to be.
Why?
Because it's important to me. Passion and love in physical form, in spiritual form. Back to the romantics. Let's own that. The power of that ecstasy. It usually informs my favorite mediums like rock and roll, poetry, and my poetry myself. It's so fundamental to how I go about life.
Now tell me this, because I don't think you're a horn dog, because you write about sexuality, but there are very sexual poems. The whole Song of Songs is very sexual.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's bad because there will be people who listen to this who are under the age of 18, for example. Do you think you're corrupting them?
No.
Why?
Because I'm being honest. I'm not lying. Again, this is, in a sense, poem being a lie. This is not a situation that applies to me. The sexual impetus, absolutely. That's experience being infused with inspiration, but then the twist of the knife, as it were, that change from physical passion into the opposite spectrum of physical passion, which is hatred. Physical passion and love, and physical passion and hatred. I just wanted to show the spectrum of what it might be. How it can look the same, how a marriage can look like a marriage but be corrupted. Or love can look like love, but it's corrupted, because I think it's real. And I think that's because what I've been dealing with a lot lately is I know a lot of kids who have messed up homes. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's very prevalent, actually. These married couples, but, the kids are coming from divorced families and situations at home that aren't good for them, They don't like being around their parents. They'd rather be at school or something like that. That's just maybe like a peek behind the curtain of what it might be like.
Okay. Okay, so tell me this. You're a poet. If you had to sum up in 2 or 3 sentences the advice you'd give to people right now, what would that advice be?
For writing? First is just write it down. A lot of us are scared to just write it down. I usually am. But you can't start playing with it. And here's the thing, another thing about poetry is experimentation on the page. Read it out loud, that's the second part. Write it down, read it out loud, see how you like it. If you don't like it, try it a different way. Plug things in, move it around, You're drafting, really, but I like more thinking of it as experimentation on the page, because it's like whenever you have like a like a cutting board, and you have the meat there, or the vegetables, everything on the board, and mixing and mashing it, you know what I mean? Or in a pot, you know, you're adding things, taking things out. It's important that you consider it as a unity to me, not as disjointed drafts, you know. They sometimes turn into that and they evolve as separate pieces, sometimes, but usually for me it's all in the pot, and you should just be mixing it all up, trying different ways. You know what I mean? That's important. So write it down, read it out loud, and then change it. Sometimes you can just like take a poem, and if you have 2 stanzas or 2 poetic paragraphs, you know, flip them just to see how it reads. And it's important to physically do it, you know what I mean? Because you can try reading it opposite, like, but when you see it, it's important that you look at it too. You know, change it around to read how it is. You know, sometimes you can invert it, sometimes you can't, but it's important to play with it, experiment with it.
I really like that response regarding writing. Now, as a poet prophet, how about people's lives now?
People's lives?
Yes. What would be the 2 or 3 sentences you would tell them?
Love people. That is, put them first and care for them. Love the environment. Put them first, care for them. And create things, please. I want to see them.
Thank you, Wes. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.